Coming in as an industry outsider like myself, who isn't from the apparel world or even retail world, I find myself constantly asking why. When I talk to manufacturers and they talk about lead times or minimum quantities, I'm going to say why. And the reason why I ask why is because I want to understand how the processes work and then propose new solutions. Well, if we're talking about lead time, what really goes into that lead time and how can we create minimum waste with maximum visibility using the data that we have. And I always think of us as a data company that happens to be in the business of selling clothes to petite women. And that the logic applies to anybody selling anything, sort of like forecasting demand, understanding how fickle customers are and how quickly their needs and wants can change and how you structure your business to anticipate that need.
Welcome to the Operate Podcast, where we give you a behind-the-scenes look at company building from the perspective of the builders themselves. This is how we operate.
Welcome to the Operate Podcast. I'm Kerry Ransom. Today's episode is sponsored by BankTech Ventures, the first strategic investment fund designed by the community banking industry for community bank innovation and investment. BankTech identifies leading products and technologies for community banks and works with the founders and management teams to maximize their impact on community banks and their businesses. If you're a bank looking to innovate and invest in the future, or a founder who wants to work with community banks, reach out to BankTech Ventures at banktechventures.com. My guest today is one of my favorite all-time founders, Isabella Sun. She is the founder and CEO at Short Story, which is a subscription e-commerce company that is focused on petite women. We'll talk today about how she discovered this need and how she's grown rapidly by delighting her customers, which I think is such a key insight for every founder, but Isabella embodies this. She has worked with both leading brands in launching Short Story, as well as developing a number of their own. And we'll talk about that and a great insight that led to that as well. And the other thing, before we start, she had a really, what I would characterize as a somewhat non-traditional path to becoming an e-commerce apparel entrepreneur. She started her career in banking and finance. So I talked about BankTech Ventures. That's where she more likely would have met me along the way, as opposed to Short Story. But I want to really dig in on that because she left that career, she started the company, and she even took it through Y Combinator. Isabella's super excited to finally get this scheduled and recorded. Thanks for joining me on the pod today.
Thanks, Kerry. It's a pleasure to be here. I am so excited to be on your podcast and have been honored to be part of the Operate family. I'm just excited to talk about my journey.
Well, it is a great one. So let's start with the inception of Short Story. I kind of teased it a little bit. You know, you were plugging along in a banking career in structured finance. What led to your idea and ultimately you saying, I have to start this company?
You know, I think my story really represents how many entrepreneurs start with a very personal pain point. And this for me was really close to my heart, where, you know, I was working on the trading floor in a serious environment where people dress up for work. And I constantly struggled with finding, you know, pants, jackets that fit me. I'm 5'1". I am a vertically compact human. And it was hard. It was always taking up a lot of time, precious time. I was a busy young professional living in New York City. And I just researched this seemingly weird problem. After doing some research, I found some interesting data that revealed that this is actually quite a common problem, that there are quite a number of women who are on the shorter side, what we call petite, who can't really find the right fit. And so there was this light bulb moment, I suppose, where I realized, okay, there's this big need that I understand and many people have, not really a solution for it. And there needs to be, and I really stress needs to be, because I felt that somebody had to go build the solution for them to really figure out this like very personal question of fit. And I felt that, well, I am not the most experienced person in the world. I'm not an industry expert. I don't know anything about apparel, but why not? So it was a bold move at the time.
Absolutely. So you talked about research. I mean, as you think back now to when you were first starting it, how big did you think this might become?
Well, Terry, to be honest, I didn't go in thinking, okay, I'm gonna build a mega ginormous
Yeah.
company. I just
Yep.
wanted to understand this problem.
Hmm.
And it was through kind of, understanding the data part of it that I saw, oh, okay, this is actually quite an average thing to be, 5'4" and under.
Hmm.
And then when I realized that is quite an average thing, then the scope of the opportunity was very clear to me.
Sure.
And that got me very excited.
Yeah, I'm sure. Right? Like a big TAM is always something that investors like me love, but there's also the okay, we can start a store and maybe we'll get a handful of people to do it. But I mean, Isabella, this thing has really taken off. So just to orient my audience, you're just past your 5-year anniversary of
Mm.
the company. Where are you at this point?
It's funny because I think as a founder, you never really forget where you start. So, and that is my apartment, literally my living room. At one point, I had sold all my furniture, no couch, no bed, and I just kind of turned it into our first office. And looking back, these last 5 years have been full of ups and downs, but today, our operations are sizable and still growing. And so we have a team, shorties, what we call shorties,
Mm,
who straddle many different parts of the business, from styling to product development, of course, the technical fit work to operations, logistics. Our footprint is now in, we have 2 warehouses where we run our business. We have an international team of
awesome.
shorties on with the same passion and goal in mind, and we're reaching new revenue milestones. So I think it's still for me, I think every day is like day one, despite how far we've come. I do think about those very, very early days in my apartment.
That's awesome. Do you see 12 months from now, do you feel like the growth will continue?
Yes, I do. I do. I think
That's
that
great.
we talk about momentum, growth momentum. I think
Hmm.
that momentum is very precious. And the momentum comes from something very simple, which is you build something that people actually like,
Yes.
and then they gotta get excited about it and they gotta tell their friends. So, for the first 2 years, we really didn't spend a dollar on marketing, and we grew from grassroots, like Reddit forums. And I remember people showed me conversations in an app called Fishbowl, where consultants would be, sharing, oh, you got to check out Short Story. So I think that's how organic growth happens,
Hmm.
is by continuing to focus on the product and just make your customers really excited and happy.
For sure. For sure. And I feel like you have done that as well as anybody that I've ever seen. So I mentioned the 5-year anniversary you just had. I love that you really still orient it back to where you started, but what would you say are some of your proudest moments that you could share in detail of the last 5 years?
There's so many moments, but that is
Hmm.
actually very simple. I think the proudest moment was when we actually invited a customer. She lives in San Francisco to come in,
Mm,
and we wanted to do an in-person VIP styling session for her. And really, it was such a special day for us. We all were very nervous, actually. We got like cookies, we got some champagne, and we laid everything out, and everyone's like, oh my God, when is she coming? And she
that's
happens to
awesome.
be so she came on her little bike, and she's a teacher who lives locally, and she's of course very petite. And we took her into her little, assembled fitting room, and we said, what is it that you really struggle with? And she said, I just feel frumpy in everything,
Hmm.
to be honest. And that there again, it was like a moment of just recognition that a lot of it is about the feeling.
Hmm.
When you wear clothes that make you look good, you feel good. It's very simple. And so she was quite honest and she said, look, I don't feel good about my body. So after doing that consultation with her, she discovered a few things. We gave her all the tips of what are the technical points of garments that actually will give you that right fit and right look. And she got really excited. She got excited. We got excited. She left with a few beta items, what we call beta items. Those are things that we make in micro batches. And she got to try them on, take them home. And that was, had the whole team was there. That was one of the proudest moments that I felt just so connected to the customer, what we do, everybody on the team. And in the end, it was, this is why we're here.
Yeah, that's awesome. It is. I think that helps crystallize. And I love that you have that such visual, singular moment and story that it sort of is emblematic. I'm sure, countless that we've talked about and others, but that's so cool. Well, you're in a space, I'm obviously have moved from being on your side as an entrepreneur fully to a little bit more of an investor in recent years, but you're in a space that has had kind of its ebbs and flows as being in favor or out of favor with investors, with e-commerce, right? Huge peaks and valleys in the last 10 to 15 years. I mean, you really haven't raised capital for several years now and have continued to grow at an amazing rate, but e-commerce just hasn't been this exciting category. So how have you thought about financing the company along the way and sort of as you sit here right now? Because there are other entrepreneurs that are, in categories that may have a great business, but it's not topically the most exciting.
I mean, Carrie, I'll give you the honest answer. I think every founder wants to raise money super easily and raise a huge round, and like everything is just there for you, right? But I think what it has done for me being in a sector where, to your point, it's like it ebbs and flows, and it forces you to be so disciplined to just be a little tunnel vision and just make the things that matter right. Which again, I go back to what's the customer experience and are we improving the product? I think the other thing about having been profitable for the last 2 years and continuing to be profitable is just this like, does your business make sense? Do the economics make sense? If it doesn't make sense, like what are you going to do about it? So probably ties back to my finance days where I'm just like, all right, if I'm going to run a lemonade stand, I hope to make some money at the end of the day. And then financing, I think it's all about getting creative in terms of financing. The strategies that we can use is credit, right? To build great relationships with our vendors and to ask. I think asking is underrated. When you've got somebody like, for example, Zappos, I know they had 120-day terms. That was part of what enabled them to grow so fast and to stay, to have cash flow. So asking, working with your vendors, building those relationships and getting great credit allows you to, scale up your business. There's also kind of interesting more options, I think, today for entrepreneurs to consider. Debt lines, credit, revolvers, things like that. And those are like, you got to be a little bit discriminating and see what's the actual APR. But, there are more options nowadays.
For sure. And so much great advice in there, Isabella, not just on financing options, but just how to even think about it. And I think it's so healthy to your point of just build a real great business. And that's the majority of what entrepreneurs who succeed end up doing anyway.
Could be a forcing function.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about e-commerce and particularly apparel e-commerce. Since you started the company, what would you say, kind of in the industry macro, what big changes do you feel like you've seen in apparel e-commerce, how operators like you and even customer trends? What changes have you seen?
It's interesting coming in as an industry outsider like myself who isn't from the apparel world or even retail world. I find myself constantly asking why. When I talk to manufacturers and they talk about lead times or minimum quantities, I'm gonna say why. And the reason why I ask why is because I want to understand how the processes work and then propose new solutions. Well, if we're talking about lead time, what really goes into that lead time, and how can we create minimum waste with maximum visibility using the data that we have? And I always think of us as a data company that happens to be in the business of selling clothes to petite women. And that the logic applies to anybody selling anything, sort of like forecasting demand, understanding how fickle customers are and how quickly their needs and wants can change, and how you structure your business to anticipate that need. So I think retailers have definitely realized the importance of data. I think they're still learning to how to leverage them. And I do think we are the ones sort of pioneering in the world of fit data, right? We know a ton about our customers. Well, how do we apply that into every single product that we create to imbue it with really information that is not visible to the eye, but it lives on every single product?
Oh, that's awesome. So I talked a little bit earlier about you have launched a number of your own brands through this. How did you think about that at the early days of the company versus now with this data superpower that you have, and how that's led to some of that work and brand building as well?
That's a great question. I think in the early days, we really thought about product creation as problem solving. So we would figure out where are the pain points of our customers, and then, in a sense, reverse engineer the products to address those pain points. I think one thing that I've learned today that it's all in the nuance. The devil's in the details, right? When we talk about petite, for example, we've got somebody who might be a size 20, right? She's what we would call a maybe petite plus, and you've got somebody who is a 000P, who's a super petite, what we call, and they are very different customers, and they have very different psyche, very different needs, and their current options are different. And so it's almost you are learning it's not sufficient to just bucket your customers in very superficial ways. But maybe you need to do many deeper layers of cluster analysis and figure out where are the overlapping areas. And that persona that you develop might actually end up surprising you. It's not somebody who you can just say, oh, that's it, customer prototype A, done. So it can get quite nuanced.
Oh, for sure. Well, and I think, your ability to do what I would call hyper segmentation is because of this understanding and this capability you have around data is enabling you to do that, both to create smaller segments, but also more nuanced segments. So that's super interesting. I've liked the idea. I talk about often this idea of N of one as sort of, it's more aspirational. I think like we all think of ourselves as a very unique being, and we have similarities with some set of cluster, but N of one of a segment of one is a really interesting idea to consider. And it feels like in what you do, you're closer to that and that ability to make somebody feel like they really are understood by short story better than anybody else. Because that's what, in
Well
human
said.
relationships, that's what we do get to.
Well said. Yeah, I think it's interesting you brought up the human relationship. I do think there's so much that AI powers, and we incorporate that into what we do every day, right? It's all about what information will allow us to better serve the customer. But I think the human touch, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, I think it's so special, and we see you. I seek that. You seek that. We as humans seek that connection. So how do we not lose that special connection as we get smarter and smarter about using data or personalization? I think it's a really interesting question, but
It is. Yeah, and to draw from a totally different industry. I do a lot of work with smaller banks who have built their historical business entirely on relationship banking, relationship
Mm,
lending, et cetera. And historically, they used to think about high tech as undermining their ability to be high touch. And what
mm,
we're working with them to understand is that high tech of today actually enables higher touch because you know more about your customer and you can be even more proactive with them when those complement each other. So I think just your understanding of the power of that human element, human touch, and you may deliver it through human interactions with your customers. You may deliver it through, as you were saying, things that live in the garments that people feel the touch through the fit.
exactly, exactly. And I think that what's human about us is about storytelling, right? And telling
Yes.
stories to each other, sharing past, present, and future. And that is very much part of our DNA here,
Mm-hmm.
is telling this story of why have we created these items. We involve our customers in the creation of these items. They are writing the narrative as much as we are. So I think that's something quite special about what we do.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think it's why the name of your company is so cool, right? Because it
That's
is
it.
like you're saying, story is so central to our business that it's actually part of our name.
Exactly.
So look ahead a few years. I mean, you are absolutely on the leading edge in data and technology, and we haven't talked really at all about the machine learning and intelligence that you all have built in there as well. But as you look ahead a few years, what other changes do you see ahead that technology is enabling, and for you, but even the industry in general? Others are going to get smarter about data. How do you continue to stay ahead?
I think part of something that's really fascinated me personally is the role of, and when we look at, TikTok, when we look at even YouTube Shorts right now, which is sort of on the rise, I guess, it's just how do we spend our time? Where's our attention? And where in the past you might be sitting in front of your TV and a commercial comes in, it's just like there's a very defined line between pure entertainment and marketing and advertising.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's everything has become a little bit more intertwined, and where our customers are looking for authenticity is they're looking for a real person to wear a real product and in their own real home setting to talk about this product. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but you're really getting the real raw feedback. And I
Mm-hmm.
think brands will learn and will figure out how to work with creators and influencers who look very different today than they did maybe even, 1, 2, 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, super, super interesting to see the segmentation of media through these creators that also have the ability to have such influence. It's and the channels that it travels over to. It's fascinating. I mean, I look
Exactly.
at where my kids consume is
Mm.
so different from where I do versus even my parents. So you look across multiple generations and it's so different.
And the attention span is very different. That's something
Yes,
I'm keenly aware of.
absolutely. Well, you also have a lot of competitors that are in this personalized style and in some cases subscription e-commerce as well. What would you say you've learned from them, and where do you feel like you've been able to really out execute or improve upon them?
I think the number one thing I've learned is really about, are you delivering value that is novel and versus really just an iteration of something that already exists. And I think there are, many ways to grow a business, but to truly be a long-lasting business and to uh continuously grow, I think it does need to be, the product itself needs to be quite differentiated, meaning you can't literally find this product elsewhere,
Hmm.
right? If
Mhm.
I'm gonna just bring in everything that already exists and put it into one place, that's fine, that's great.
Sure.
But really to add value for the customer is the best quality the best style, the best
Mm.
fit at the best price. And none of those are negotiable. It's really, truly the best of the best. And you get to a point where the customer is thinking, well, why would I not use this service? Or why would I not use this company? It's a no-brainer. That is where the delight and the excitement and the stickiness will really come from. And it may not, I think it's really hard to advertise your way into that. And in some case, for founders and companies, it could be dangerous to try to advertise your way into product market fit or customer love. I do think it starts with the product.
Mm. And there's so many good, even long-term examples of companies that have tried to do that, probably unsuccessfully, and ones that have just stuck with great products for a long period of time and done that very, very well. And
Yeah, I have a funny example in a completely different world, but Trader Joe's is one of my favorite grocery stores. Now,
absolutely.
so many grocery stores, so many options. Somehow they stand out. I enjoy going there. The folks there are very happy, very helpful. The products are very unique. Some, the branding, packaging is even a bit quirky. And I find that it's different. And I want to go to Trader Joe's to spend my money there. So I don't know, something that always I think about.
Absolutely. And I think it's a fantastic example. Well, let's talk about the other side a little bit when I Trader Joe's and Amazon. And
Mm.
you think about, Amazon has been really interesting, I think, in that they've taken several costs that would traditionally be in their P&L that were cost centers, and they've turned those into businesses that they've been able to actually monetize and make money on because of their scale or just thinking about it differently. So as you think about short story and the unique things that you do, like how you work with suppliers and the supply chain, what are there opportunities you're considering that you might be able to take portions of your business and turn them into new businesses for short story?
Carrie, I see so many opportunities for us to do that because we feel the pain of sending, orders across on PDFs and on really archaic systems that I was actually a little bit shocked in the beginning when I started in the industry. Because outside of that, we've got OpenAI next door, right? It's such a different world. And so I see such an opportunity to bring the entire industry, the systems that we use, the tools that we use, bring it forward and modernize how demand forecasting is done, how inventory management is done, how customer reviews and feedback capture is done, and how customer reviews and feedback can be, fed back into your product creation process. And so all of that is what we do today, quite naturally. That is our business model. But I just think of the millions of other businesses who are still, doing it on spreadsheets and trying to figure out the fundamentals of retailing. So I'm super excited about the possibilities of white labeling or spinning out perhaps technology that we build in-house.
Very interesting. And obviously, hopefully more to come on that. Last thing, and then I want to spend the last few minutes talking about you, Isabella, but last thing, as you think about misconceptions. So I talked earlier about, the sort of interest, non-interest in e-commerce from when you think about people say, oh, look at Isabella, she's running this company called Short Story. What would you say are the biggest misconceptions people have from the outside about your business, if they're just kind of looking at it from the outside?
That's a really good question. I think when you look at the apparel business, there is a sort of a surface level perception that it's about chasing trends or, pretty clothes. And I really don't think of it that way. In my mind, the image that I have is our customer. And it's somebody who has unique needs and it's our role is to help figure out how do we fit into her life, to integrate into her life. So it's quite a different mental model, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most investors or somebody who may not be so familiar with our business may think, okay, it's a clothing business, but that's really the tip of the iceberg. And the interesting thing that I'm interested in solving and building is the underlying infrastructure that empowers us to make smart decisions. So I think that isn't immediately obvious, but it's
Sure.
where my true passion and interest lie.
That's awesome. I mean, I think that's a great way to explain it, that somebody on the outside could very quickly judge and say, oh, they have a storefront and sell clothing, and that's just like anybody else that might do that. But I feel privileged that I got to spend as much time as I did early on in seeing that your interest was far beyond that. And that, as you said earlier, was just enabled by the data business and the infrastructure that you were investing in building. And where this may go could be very different in the future.
Yeah, and it's funny, but I think if anyone were to walk into one of our meetings and look at the whiteboard that we have, it would look much more like a stats class than anything about fashion magazines. So I think that really speaks to where our mental models are, where our strengths are, and how we frame problems.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Well, the last few minutes we have, let's talk more about you. First, did you have any inclination before this that you might become an entrepreneur at some point?
Truth be told, I have always, since I was probably 3, 4, 5 years old, like to run a business. And my family actually, it is entrepreneurial. We have several entrepreneurs within the family. I grew up with not a lot, but always seeing how my mom is very entrepreneurial. She's owned her business for 30 some years. So I've seen how tough it can be, but also how rewarding and fulfilling it can be. So I do think that was kind of there from an early age.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree that I'm sure even subconsciously it was there. So interesting. Well, I often find as well that successful people have these rituals or disciplines or things that they really are committed to. I'm curious, do you have any of those, and what have you really gotten out of those?
I think we all need to blow off some steam once in a while, and for me, that is sort of like high adrenaline sports. I'm really into anything that has a slight element of danger, I think. So, your skydiving, sailing, rock climbing, that sort of stuff, I think it really helps me decompress and forget about, and even just take a momentary mental break and kind of refresh and reset. I try to go to Barry's, many of us here in SF go to Barry's boot camp and kind of sweat it out. So yeah, that is my ritual.
Okay. As you've grown the company, what would you say has challenged you the most personally?
God, there's so many things. Where do I start? I think that just the mental toughness required to ride that roller coaster and to accept that it is going to be a roller coaster. I think especially in our business where it's highly operational. I'll give you one example, right? We opened up the warehouse the first day, the pipe burst, PE went out of power. We couldn't operate our pack stations. Okay, so we're getting a backup generator. Okay, well, we need to get oil for the backup generator. I'm doing that one moment. Next moment, I'm jumping on an investor call, right? And then the next moment, I'm looking at, okay, what is the new product line? And this fit spec, does it meet our qualifications? So it's just the sheer amount of things that you'll encounter as a founder. And you have to be like, oh, always coming back to center. That's been really challenging, really hard, but I think I'm still continuing to hone that as a human.
I think that's hard. And like, how do you stay, to your point, how do you stay present? Okay, this is the problem in front of us. We need to address it. And people, others are going to take their cues from how you respond and react to it
Mm,
as well, right? So as you become bigger, you have to become even more aware of how your actions are ripple through an organization.
that's right. And I think that another big lesson learned for me is as a founder, you are trying to get things done
Mhm.
and you're trying to build it from 0 to 1. As a CEO, you are trying to develop other people to make
That's
them
it.
brilliant,
Mhm.
to allow them to be excellent. And that means you got to sit down sometimes and say nothing.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's saying nothing is quite hard as a founder.
That's right. I totally agree. That evolution is difficult for a lot of people that are 0 to 1, get things done types. And so it often a learned set of skills for sure. And so recognizing that I think is huge that you can even articulate it like you do. Well, what advice would you give to early career talent? So somebody who maybe is in a bank, was headed down the path you were on, and they're thinking about an entrepreneurial idea. What advice would you give them?
I think it goes back to the early days when trying to start a short story, I just encountered a lot of no's.
Mhm.
And, even before starting a short story, I had applied to different tech companies and I, didn't even get an interview. It was a lot of no's. So I think there's so much that can get in the way of starting something or making something happen. And even today, I constantly check myself if it's a no, is it really a no?
Mhm.
So my advice would be when you encounter a no, question it and really try to understand the situation or the other person's position and try to understand the why.
Mhm.
And then only then can you figure out, are there ways to unlock or to go around? Like it's like the water that flows, it's like that's the way, the path forward. And if it's an internal no, then you got to be honest with yourself. Am I allowing myself to stop at the first obstacle? And if that's the case, then well, then you got to hack yourself. You got to hack your own, you got to reprogram yourself, hack your own
Mhm.
programming and figure out, well, what is it that I need to do to overcome my own mental hurdles? So I think that will allow you in the long term to achieve things that you may not have thought were possible.
Mm. Such great advice. I love that. And just how you laid it out that way, Isabella. Thank you. Well, last question, and I know we may have to do a round two of this, by the way. Uh, how do you feel like my audience can help you and short story the most right now? What can we do to help you?
Well, thank you for asking that. I think it's really lovely when you experience something yourself and then you're able to share that story with somebody else, and so to what is helpful for us, obviously we want more people to know about us.
Mhm.
And if you meet somebody who is on the petite side, tell them about us and what we do and our story of how we came to be and why we're doing what we're doing today. I think that would be I would be incredibly appreciative of that.
Well, Isabella, thank you so much for taking the time. I know how crazy busy you are. I knew this would be a super fun conversation, and I am also so grateful to have been able to work with you for the last few years and just amazed at what you've accomplished in such a short time. And I have to say, I'm super excited for what's ahead. You and Sam and the team are just such an amazing group that I feel lucky to be part of it.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I have loved being part of the Operate family. You guys have been absolutely amazing, and I know I can always turn to you for great advice. And I think those on this podcast are very lucky to have the opportunity to listen to these conversations and your words of wisdom. So thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Operate Podcast. If you like this conversation, as a favor to me, you can rate us, review us, or subscribe, or tell your friends. You can also reach out to us on Twitter at Operate Podcast. Until next week, get out there and operate.